The man who once made the world fall silent with his voice died silently from the very habit he used to endure racial hatred. February 15, 1965, Nat King Cole, whose velvet tones had serenaded presidents and paupers alike, drew his final breath at age 45, killed by 3 packs of cigarettes a day that had been his refuge from a world that loved him when he sang, but hated him when he lived. In a Santa Monica hospital room surrounded by machines that couldn't save him, the greatest paradox of American entertainment was ending forever. Here lay a man whose voice had united millions across racial lines, whose music had touched hearts that prejudice had hardened, whose artistry had transcended every barrier except the most important one: the right to simply exist as a human being in his own country. Frank Sinatra had called him a man with the voice of an angel and the courage of a lion. But what kind of courage is required when your angel's voice can't protect you from a lion's den of hatred? What price do you pay when your gift becomes both salvation and curse? When the very thing that makes you beloved also makes you a target? The irony was devastating. Nat King Cole died from cigarettes, but the real killer was a society that created such unbearable stress that 3 packs a day seemed like the only way to cope. The smoke that calmed his nerves as he faced daily humiliation became the smoke that destroyed his lungs. He had sung unforgettable to the world, but the world forgot to love him when the music stopped. But how does a man with an angel's voice become trapped in hell on earth? How does someone who united America through music find himself divided from the very country that made him famous? The story of Nat King Cole is the story of a nation's deepest contradiction. A place that could fall in love with black genius while refusing to accept black humanity. Born Nathaniel Adams Coles on March 17, 1919 in Montgomery, Alabama, he entered a world where the color of his skin would determine everything except the color of his voice. His father, Edward Coles, was a Baptist minister who filled their modest home with hymns that would become the foundation of his son's musical salvation. His mother, Perlina, was a church organist whose fingers found melodies that her boy would transform into revolution. But even in the house of God, young Nathaniel learned the first lesson that would define his life. He was loved when he sang, hated when he lived. The church welcomed his voice during service, but reminded him of his place the moment the music stopped. The Coles family moved to Chicago when Nat was 4 years old, part of the Great Migration that saw millions of black Americans flee the brutal segregation of the South for the promise of better opportunities in northern cities. But even in Chicago, the family discovered that racism wore different clothes, more subtle perhaps, but no less poisonous. The same churches that welcomed their voices on Sunday mornings reminded them of their place the other 6 days of the week. It was in Chicago's South Side that young Nathaniel first encountered the piano as more than just a church instrument. The family's upright piano became his sanctuary, a place where the harsh realities of the outside world could be transformed into something beautiful. By age 12, he was already playing with a sophistication that amazed adults, his small fingers finding melodies that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his years. The boy who would become Nat King Cole learned early that music was both escape and prison. On the piano bench, he was free to create worlds where color didn't matter, where beauty was the only currency that counted. But the moment he stepped away from the keys, he was reminded that in 1930s America, a black child's dreams were considered luxuries the world couldn't afford to indulge. His first professional performances came in Chicago's South Side clubs, where a teenage Nat played piano for crowds that appreciated his talent but couldn't protect him from the larger world's cruelty. These early experiences taught him a lesson that would define his entire career. He could win hearts with his music, but changing minds about race would prove far more difficult. The clubs of the South Side were a microcosm of American racial dynamics. Black performers could entertain integrated audiences, but they entered through back doors and left the same way. They could make white people dance and cry and fall in love, but they couldn't eat in the same restaurants or sleep in the same hotels. For young Nat, these contradictions were a daily education in the mathematics of American prejudice. In 1936, at the age of 17, Nat formed his first band and adopted the stage name that would make him famous. The King Cole Trio, Nat on piano and vocals with guitar and bass accompaniment, created a sound that was intimate and sophisticated, perfect for the small clubs where black musicians were allowed to perform. But even the name King Cole was a small act of defiance, a suggestion that a black man could claim royalty in a country that treated him like a subject. The trio's breakthrough came with their recording of Sweet Lorraine in 1940, a performance that showcased Nat's revolutionary approach to popular song. Where other singers might belt out lyrics with theatrical flourish, Nat whispered them with conversational intimacy, as if he were singing directly to each listener. His voice had a quality that was both smooth and slightly rough, like velvet with just enough texture to catch the light. But even as his musical career began to flourish, Nat faced the daily humiliations of Jim Crow America. Hotels that welcomed white entertainers refused him service. Restaurants that catered to his white audiences wouldn't let him eat there. He could perform for integrated crowds but couldn't live in integrated neighborhoods. The contradiction was embodied in the very clubs where he performed. He was loved when he sang, hated when he lived. Night after night, Nat would sit at the piano, his elegant tuxedo and warm smile creating an image of sophisticated success, while knowing that when the show ended, he would be escorted out the back door like hired help. He developed a coping mechanism that would stay with him for life: cigarettes. What began as a prop for his sophisticated image became a necessity, a way to calm nerves that were constantly on edge from the daily microaggressions and major confrontations that marked his professional life. The 1940s brought increasing fame and the same persistent racism. Nat's recording of Mona Lisa in 1950 became one of the biggest hits of the decade, earning him international recognition and making him one of the most successful recording artists in America. The song's success opened doors that had previously been closed to black performers, but it also highlighted how exceptional a black artist had to be to achieve even basic recognition. Success brought new challenges and new forms of discrimination. When Nat and his wife Maria decided to buy a home in the affluent Hancock Park neighborhood of Los Angeles in 1948, they faced a level of hatred that shocked even a man accustomed to prejudice. The house itself was beautiful, a sprawling estate that represented everything Nat had worked to achieve. But the neighbors saw only one thing: a black family moving into their white sanctuary. White neighbors organized protests, circulated petitions demanding that the Coles leave, and even burned a cross on his lawn, the same lawn where his young children played. The Ku Klux Klan had followed him from Alabama to California, proving that geography couldn't cure hatred. Local newspapers covered the controversy as if there were two legitimate sides to the question of whether a successful black family had the right to live where they could afford. But Nat's response to this intimidation revealed the quiet strength that defined his character. When neighbors demanded that he move, he simply replied, "I am not going anywhere." The words were spoken softly, without anger or theatricality, but they carried the weight of a man who had decided that he would no longer accept limitations based on his race. He understood that his presence in that neighborhood was about more than just having a nice house. It was about claiming the right to live wherever his success had earned him the privilege to afford. The incident in Hancock Park became a defining moment in Nat's life and career. He could have chosen to retreat, to accept the limitations that white society wanted to impose on him. Instead, he chose to stay and fight, not with protests or speeches, but simply by living his life with dignity and refusing to be intimidated. But the stress of constant vigilance, of never knowing when the next attack might come, drove him to increase his cigarette consumption. What had been 1 pack a day became 2, then 3. This quiet courage would be tested again and again throughout the 1950s as Nat's fame grew, and so did the backlash from those who couldn't accept a black man's success. The most devastating test came on April 10, 1956, at the Birmingham Municipal Auditorium in Alabama, during a concert that would become one of the most shameful moments in American entertainment history. The Birmingham concert was supposed to be a homecoming of sorts, a return to the South for a man who had conquered the world's stages. But the venue itself told the story of American apartheid. White patrons sat in comfortable seats near the stage, while black fans were relegated to a separate, inferior section in the back. Nat had reluctantly agreed to perform under these conditions, telling himself that music might bridge divides that politics couldn't cross. The attack came without warning during the second song of his set. 6 members of the White Citizens Council, a respectable segregationist organization, had planned the assault with military precision. As Nat sat at the piano, his fingers dancing across the keys, his voice carrying the opening notes of a love song, the men rushed the stage with coordinated fury. The first attacker grabbed Nat's legs, trying to drag him from the piano bench. Others punched and kicked at him, screaming racial slurs that echoed through the auditorium. The attack lasted only minutes, but it felt like an eternity to the 4,000 people watching. Some in horror, others in approval. Nat suffered a broken nose and back injuries, but the emotional wounds ran much deeper. What happened next revealed both Nat's extraordinary character and the impossible position he occupied in American society. After receiving medical attention backstage, his face swollen and his body aching, he insisted on returning to the stage to finish his performance. The image of Nat King Cole, bruised but unbroken, sitting back down at the piano and continuing his show, became a powerful symbol of both artistic dedication and the daily courage required of black performers in segregated America. But it also highlighted the terrible loneliness of his position. He was celebrated by millions, yet vulnerable to violence from those who could never accept his success. That night, after the concert, alone in his hotel room, Nat smoked an entire pack of cigarettes, the first time he had ever done so. The smoke that was supposed to calm his nerves became the beginning of the addiction that would kill him. The pinnacle of Nat's pioneering efforts came in 1956 with the launch of The Nat King Cole Show on NBC television. The 15-minute program made him the first black performer to host a network television show, a breakthrough that should have been celebrated as a major step forward for civil rights. Instead, it became another battleground in the ongoing war over black visibility in American culture. The show featured Nat in an elegant setting, performing songs and chatting with guests in a format that emphasized his sophistication and talent. The production values were first-rate, the musical performances flawless. For 15 minutes each week, America could see a black man presented not as a stereotype or a curiosity, but as a consummate professional and gentleman. But quality couldn't overcome prejudice. Despite strong ratings and critical acclaim, the show struggled to find sponsors willing to associate their products with a black host. Major advertisers, terrified of Southern boycotts, refused to buy commercial time during the program. Rheingold Beer, one of the few sponsors willing to support the show, faced death threats and boycotts that cost them millions in sales. The message was clear. No matter how talented, how successful, or how beloved a black performer might be, there were still barriers that talent alone couldn't break down. Madison Avenue was indeed afraid of the dark, and their fear was costing Nat more than just money. It was costing him his health. The stress of fighting for his show's survival while maintaining his public composure drove his smoking to dangerous levels. 3 packs a day became his new normal, a pharmaceutical band-aid for wounds that society kept reopening. The situation was both absurd and heartbreaking. Nat King Cole, one of America's most popular recording artists, couldn't sell soap or cigarettes on television because of his race. The man whose voice had made millions of dollars for record companies found himself hosting a show that advertisers considered too controversial to support. Nat fought to keep the show on the air, even agreeing to perform for reduced compensation and taking on the financial burden that sponsors should have carried. He understood that the program represented more than just his own career. It was a test of whether America was ready to see black performers as more than just entertainers, whether they could be accepted as hosts, as personalities, as full human beings worthy of respect. The show's cancellation after just 1 year was a devastating blow, not just to Nat personally, but to the broader cause of civil rights. The message was clear: no matter how talented, how successful, or how beloved a black performer might be, there were still barriers that talent alone couldn't break down. In a moment of rare public frustration, Nat commented on the show's failure with characteristic understatement. "Madison Avenue is afraid of the dark." The comment revealed his understanding that the real barrier wasn't just individual prejudice, but institutional racism embedded in the very structure of American commerce and entertainment. The failure of the television show marked the beginning of a more difficult period in Nat's career. While he continued to record successfully and perform to sold-out crowds, the constant battles against racism were taking their toll. The man who had always projected an image of unflappable grace was showing signs of wear, finding refuge in cigarettes and alcohol as he struggled to maintain his public composure. Those closest to Nat noticed changes in his behavior during this period. The warm, gregarious personality that had charmed audiences and colleagues alike became more guarded, more cautious. He began to retreat into himself, finding solace in small pleasures, cooking elaborate meals for friends, working in his garden, spending quiet evenings at home with his family. These private moments revealed a side of Nat King Cole that the public rarely saw. Away from the spotlight, he was a man who treasured simplicity and order, who found peace in routine and domesticity. He loved to cook, particularly elaborate Southern dishes that reminded him of his childhood, and he would spend hours in the kitchen preparing meals for friends and family. The contrast between his public and private personas was striking. On stage, he was the picture of sophisticated cool, his every gesture calculated for maximum effect. At home, he was a man who delighted in the simple pleasures of family life, who could spend hours playing with his children or working on household projects. But even these private retreats couldn't fully shield him from the ongoing stress of navigating his career in a racist society. The cigarettes that had initially been a prop for his sophisticated image became a necessity, a way to calm nerves that were constantly on edge from the daily microaggressions and major confrontations that marked his professional life. By the early 1960s, Nat was smoking 3 packs a day, a habit that those around him recognized as dangerous but felt powerless to stop. The cigarettes had become as much a part of his image as his voice. The sophisticated man with the perfectly groomed mustache, always with a cigarette elegantly positioned between his fingers. The irony was devastating. The man whose voice was his fortune was slowly destroying the very instrument that had brought him fame. But for Nat, the cigarettes represented more than just a habit. They were a form of self-medication for the anxiety and frustration of living as a successful black man in a society that wanted to limit his success. Throughout this period, Nat continued to create some of his most memorable music. Songs like Unforgettable, Mona Lisa, and the Christmas song became standards that would outlive their creator by decades. His interpretation of these songs revealed an artist who had learned to find beauty in sadness, hope in disappointment, and grace under the most difficult circumstances. The Christmas song, in particular, became a seasonal anthem that demonstrated Nat's unique ability to make familiar material feel fresh and personal. His warm, intimate delivery transformed Mel Torme's composition into something that felt like a personal gift from the artist to each listener. A moment of connection that transcended the barriers that separated performer from audience. The song's enduring popularity, it continues to be played every Christmas season more than 50 years after Nat's death, speaks to something essential about his artistry. He had the rare ability to make listeners feel that he was singing directly to them, that his voice carried not just melody but genuine emotion and human connection. But as the 1960s progressed, it became clear that Nat's years of heavy smoking were catching up with him. He began experiencing the persistent cough and shortness of breath that would eventually be diagnosed as lung cancer. The diagnosis, when it came in 1964, was both shocking and somehow inevitable. Shocking because he was only 45 years old and at the height of his artistic powers. Inevitable because his 3-pack-a-day habit had made such an outcome almost certain. Nat's response to his cancer diagnosis revealed the same quiet courage that had defined his entire career. He continued working even as he underwent treatment, refusing to let the disease defeat him or diminish his commitment to his craft. He recorded what would become his final album, Love, in 1965, just months before his death. The recording sessions for this final album were both heartbreaking and inspiring. Nat's voice, weakened by illness and treatment, retained its essential warmth and intelligence even as its power diminished. The album stands as a testament to an artist's refusal to surrender, a final statement from a man who understood that his time was running out but was determined to use what remained productively. During his final months, Nat also worked on various projects that would ensure his musical legacy. He collaborated with his daughter, Natalie, who was beginning her own musical career, passing on the techniques and insights that had made him one of the most distinctive vocalists of his generation. The relationship between Nat and Natalie was particularly touching during this period. She was just beginning to establish herself as a performer, and her father's illness gave their musical collaboration an added poignancy. He understood that she would carry on his musical legacy, but he also wanted to prepare her for the challenges that came with being a black performer in the entertainment industry. In February 1965, as his condition worsened, Nat was hospitalized at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica. Even there, surrounded by medical equipment and facing the reality of his impending death, he maintained the grace and dignity that had characterized his entire public life. Visitors reported that he remained concerned about others' comfort, asking about their lives and careers even as his own was ending. Nat King Cole died on February 15, 1965, leaving behind a musical legacy that would influence generations of performers and a personal legacy of quiet courage in the face of systematic oppression. His funeral was attended by some of the biggest names in entertainment, a testament to the respect he had earned from his peers across racial lines. Frank Sinatra, who had long admired Nat's artistry, served as a pallbearer, and later said, "Nat had the voice of an angel and the courage of a lion." The comment captured something essential about Nat's life and career, the combination of extraordinary artistic gifts and personal bravery that had allowed him to succeed in an industry that was often hostile to black performers. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Nat's legacy came years later, when his daughter Natalie used new technology to record a duet with her deceased father on his signature song, Unforgettable. The 1991 recording, which featured Natalie singing alongside her father's original 1951 vocal track, became a massive hit and introduced Nat's voice to a new generation of listeners. The Unforgettable duet represented something more than just a technical achievement. It was a moment of artistic immortality, proof that great artistry transcends the limitations of mortality. The recording allowed father and daughter to share a musical moment across the boundaries of life and death, creating something beautiful from loss and separation. The success of the duet also highlighted the enduring power of Nat's voice and artistry. More than 25 years after his death, his vocals could still move audiences, still create moments of genuine emotion and connection. The man who had worried about being forgotten had instead achieved a form of immortality through his music. Today, more than 50 years after his death, Nat King Cole's influence on American music and culture continues to resonate. His approach to popular song, intimate, conversational, and deeply emotional, influenced countless singers who followed him. Artists as diverse as Tony Bennett, Diana Krall, and Harry Connick Jr. have cited him as a major influence on their own vocal styles. But Nat's legacy extends beyond just musical influence. His pioneering role in television, his quiet dignity in the face of racism, and his refusal to compromise his artistic vision made him a role model for later generations of black performers. Artists like Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, and Michael Jackson all benefited from the barriers that Nat had helped to break down, often at great personal cost. The questions that surround Nat King Cole's life and career reflect larger issues about the price of pioneering and the complex relationship between art and social change. Was his relatively quiet approach to civil rights the right strategy for his time? Or should he have been more confrontational in challenging racism? Did his success make things easier for the black performers who followed him? Or did it create unrealistic expectations about what individual talent could achieve in a racist society? What seems clear is that Nat King Cole occupied a unique and often impossible position in American culture. He was expected to be a credit to his race while never acknowledging that race was an issue. He was supposed to integrate American entertainment while never making white audiences uncomfortable about integration. He was asked to be both a symbol of progress and a reassuring figure who wouldn't threaten the status quo. The toll that these contradictory expectations took on Nat personally may never be fully understood. The man who projected such grace and composure in public was fighting daily battles that would have broken lesser individuals. His decision to medicate his anxiety with cigarettes ultimately cost him his life, but it's hard to imagine how else he might have coped with the constant stress of his position. In our current era, when issues of representation and equality in entertainment continue to be hotly debated, Nat King Cole's story feels both historical and contemporary. How many performers today face similar pressures to be representatives of their communities while also being individual artists? How many find themselves caught between the desire to speak out about injustice and the need to maintain their careers? The entertainment industry has certainly changed since Nat's time. Black performers can now host television shows without losing sponsors, live in any neighborhood they can afford, and speak out about political issues without automatically ending their careers. But the underlying tensions between artistic expression and social responsibility, between individual success and collective progress, remain as relevant as ever. Perhaps Nat King Cole's greatest legacy is the reminder that progress often comes at a personal cost, that those who break barriers often pay a price that others don't see or acknowledge. His willingness to endure that cost, to maintain his dignity and artistry despite the obstacles placed in his path, created opportunities that others could build upon. The voice that once whispered unforgettable continues to remind us that true artistry transcends the circumstances that create it. Nat King Cole proved that beauty and grace could flourish even in the harshest soil, that music could bridge divides that politics couldn't cross, and that a single voice used with courage and skill could change the world in ways both subtle and profound. Today, when The Christmas song plays in homes around the world each December when young singers study his phrasing and approach to melody. When his recordings continue to find new audiences across generational and racial lines, Nat King Cole achieves the immortality that all artists dream of but few attain. He had once said, "People don't slip, time catches up with them." For most of us, that's true. Time eventually reveals our limitations and diminishes our achievements. But for Nat King Cole, time has done the opposite, revealing the full scope of his courage and the enduring power of his artistry. The man who was loved when he sang and hated when he lived has found a different kind of acceptance in death, one based not on the color of his skin but on the content of his character and the beauty of his voice. In the end, perhaps that's the most fitting legacy for someone who spent his life trying to be judged by his talent rather than his race. The velvet voice that serenaded a generation has become the eternal voice that continues to remind us of what America could be at its best. A place where genius is recognized regardless of its source, where talent creates opportunities rather than obstacles, where the content of someone's character matters more than the circumstances of their birth. Nat King Cole died at 45, far too young, his voice silenced by a habit born of stress and the constant need to self-medicate against the pain of living as a successful black man in a hostile world. But in his brief time on Earth, he created something that no amount of prejudice could diminish. A body of work that continues to bring joy, comfort, and beauty to millions of people around the world. That may be the ultimate victory over the forces that tried to limit him. Not just that he succeeded despite their opposition, but that his success outlasted their hatred, that his voice continues to sing long after the voices of his critics have been forgotten. In the end, love proved more powerful than hate, beauty more enduring than ugliness, and the velvet voice more lasting than the harsh words of those who tried to silence it.